Okay, let's go ahead and start. Welcome, everybody. We're going to have a nice change of pace this week. You'll hear less from me. We have, as you know, a guest, a Vietnam veteran, here in the flesh to talk to us. And I hope you brought some good questions and we can get some good dialogue going. The way I've set this up, and maybe you can think about doing this for your own interviews, is that I've asked him to do a personal narrative for, 15 minutes or so. And so you might want to lead that way. The people you're interviewing might want to have them open up just telling you their story, and then you can go from there. You can ask them questions. You can have them fill in gaps. So that's what we'll try to do today. We'll proceed that way. I told my students, and I've told, this is my dad, David Brown. I think everybody is clear that we can have, that this is an open intercourse between everybody. So feel free to ask questions as he's going through his narrative. I think you can interrupt him at any time and he won't burst into tears, right?
We'll
Run
see.
out of the room. We'll see. So if a question comes up while he's talking, feel free to just go ahead and throw it out, and I'll try to mediate a little bit. I'll be looking for hands, and hopefully I can see the monitor here. And so if you have hands in Twillo or in Vernal, go ahead and raise them, or if I don't see you, just interrupt. So let's start that way, and then we've got some slides, I guess they were original slides, they're digitized now into a PowerPoint presentation. So we'll get to those in a little bit. So we've got some visuals to go along with it. But I'll turn the time over to David, Mr. Brown, to talk about his experiences in Vietnam, and then we'll go from there. Does that sound good?
Okay, sounds good. I'm way nervous. I was telling Clayton the other day that
Professor Brown.
Excuse me. That 10 years ago and back, I would have never done this. It's really hard, or would have been hard for me to discuss some of my experiences. And over time, I've kind of mellowed out a little bit. So I feel very comfortable. I feel more comfortable about people asking me questions and me responding rather than just giving some kind of presentation that's hard for me to do. But I'll begin by saying that when I graduated from high school, I had no plans for anything. My idea was I wanted to buy a motorcycle and just travel. School wasn't in my plans, and so I was wondering what I was going to do, and listening to the news and the feeling at the time in the country is it seemed like that there were a lot of people that were for the war, or a group that had the philosophy, and maybe many of you already know this, worried about the spread of communism and the domino effect and what was going to happen. The politicians pushed that a lot. And that was on the news. And then there was another group of people that were the protesters, the kind of hippies, those that believed in peace. And so there was a lot of controversy there. There was the demonstrations. And listening to both sides, they both made sense to me. But, there was a lot of confusion at the time in the country. And I was curious to know what the answers really were. And I thought to myself, well, I'm not doing anything. Maybe the best thing for me to do is to find out firsthand. So right after high school, I was 18 years old, and a friend of mine, we decided to join the Army. We volunteered to go to Vietnam, and we also volunteered to go in the infantry. We thought that would be the best way to satisfy our curiosity. I think we were the only ones in our graduating class from Logan High that joined. There were a few people that drafted, and a lot of people, there were a few people that were drafted or joined at the time, and there were a few that were drafted later, but most of them joined the Army Reserves or the Air Force or the Navy or whatever, reserves, or to avoid getting drafted. But that postponed a few, or if they went on an LDS mission, they would get a deferment for that, or if they're ill health or whatever. So anyway, we decided to join. We joined, and we had, 2 months of intense combat training. And physically, after 3 weeks of intense training, everybody had to have new clothes. Those that were overweight lost weight. Those that were like me that weighed 135 pounds gained maybe 5 pounds, and so we had to have new clothes, which was interesting. But anyway, and there was also a psychological training where they taught you to never question a command. And if any of you have been in the service, you know that's a biggie because you start questioning and you have chaos. So you didn't question orders. Also, they kind of dehumanized the Viet Cong. They gave them a name of either Gooks or Dinks, is what we called them Dinks, or Charlie, you know, for Viet Cong. So they try to, and for good reason, you know, you prepare yourself to go to war, and it helps to be young, because if you're a 25 or 30, 35-year-old person, you're going to start questioning things more so. But anyway, I was assigned and went over to the Central Highlands. Many of you probably know about where that is. That's the jungle area. That's not where the rice paddies are. That's up in the jungle, and it was very dense. In some places, it was a triple canopy, which in the middle of the day seemed like nighttime. It was a whole different experience. I went from here, it was in February, and I think it was about 15 below. When we ended at Cameron Bay, it was over 100 degrees and 100% humidity. So it was a big change. I was assigned up in the Central Highlands with the 2nd Platoon, Bravo Company, the 1st of the 22nd Infantry, and the 4th Infantry Division. I remember first arriving there with the unit, and there was a guy named Henzo that was a Native American. He was wearing a beaded headband that he had made himself, and first thing he said to me is, "You're lucky to be in the 2nd Platoon." And I said, "Why is that?" And he said, "Because the 2nd Platoon has a halo around it." I thought, and this guy seemed like kind of a medicine man, you know, I didn't know what he meant, but he explained that the 2nd Platoon had some kind of protection over them, or had in the past, that compared to the other units, they had far less casualties. Well, that made me feel a little bit better. Looking back after 14 months of being there, it was incredibly true. There were so many instances that just to me were unexplainable. Just we seemed lucky about everything. And I think part of it is that we had our stuff together, for one thing. We had a habit or a track record of having our stuff together. I don't know, many of you may know this if you've been in the military, but 1 out of every 10 people in the military actually fight. The rest of them are support. They're, you know, clerks, transportation, mechanics, cooks. They're all supportive of the infantry. And they're all important, and I did appreciate every one of them. You have to have meals when you need them, and you have to have clothing, and you have to have firepower from support from the artillery and of course, I think the thing we appreciated most were the helicopters. That's how we got in and out of the jungle, is they'd fly us in helicopters, which was kind of cool because they were Hueys with the door stripped off. They had a door gunner on each side with an M60 machine gun, and we'd just dangle our legs out and just over the trees as you're flying over. Beautiful view. So that was pretty cool, except for where we land, they were the CAs, the combat assaults, when we went in and went out, were sometimes pretty hairy because we'd receive fire of sitting ducks going in. So you'd have to jump out and get cover. Made it a little bit difficult because most of the helicopters wouldn't land completely on the ground. They'd hover maybe about 2 or 3 feet above, which wouldn't be too bad jumping out of a helicopter, except for you've got a rucksack on your back that weighed anywhere from 60 to 100 pounds. For somebody that weighs 130, 140 pounds, that's almost your weight. And jumping off 2 or 3 feet could be, pretty hazardous. It's easy to break a leg or something. So that was interesting, jumping out of the helicopters and with bullets flying around. I really respected all of the people that were support. More so the helicopter pilots. Guys were incredible, absolutely incredible. You know, they could land any kind of weather, any kind of wind. And of course the door gunners, which were probably the most dangerous job there was. Sitting targets, even though they had an M60, you've got plush ground out there where if somebody's firing on you, you really are lucky to know where the fire's coming from. So I appreciated them, and they kept our backs a lot of the times. But anyway, as much as I appreciated all those people, there was a huge difference between being in the infantry and some of the other support groups. Huge, huge difference. One of those is that we didn't have beds. And those that were in base camps and other places, they had nice beds to sleep in. They had hot and cold drinks and food. They had entertainment. They had flush toilets, which we didn't have. And so they had all the conveniences that we didn't have. They had their hot food. We ate sea rations. I don't know if any of you have ever eaten sea rations or if you even have those anymore, but they're just canned food. Some of them were 10 or 15 years old, and you'd eat all your food out of the sea rations. Life in the bush, we call it the bush in the jungle, was interesting. The best way to describe it is kind of living like an animal, I guess, in a way. No conveniences at all. We just want to point out first, too, that the average age in Vietnam of a soldier was 19 years old. That's pretty incredible when you think that there were several that were in their 20s. That's a lot of 18-year-olds to average that out. So most generally, they were 18-year-old kids. And kids, really, kids. And a tour of duty was 1 year. If you extended, you could extend, which I did. You extend an extra 2 months. By doing that, at the end of your tour, you had less than 6 months left if you were in for 2 years. And so you ETS'd, you were out of the Army. You only spent a year and a half in, which I hated the Army more than I did being over there. So the Mickey Mouse games, and those that have been in the Army can appreciate that. So you'd extend for 60-plus days, and then when your time was up, you'd go home. And you wouldn't go home for 30 days and then have to go pull another 6 months somewhere else. So it's kind of a gamble, of the situation you're in. It's tough to extend for 60 days when, you could be gambling your life, too. The type of warfare there was guerrilla warfare. Down in the Delta, it was a little bit different in the rice paddies because sometimes you didn't know who you were fighting. Some of the Viet Cong would be working in the rice paddies in the day, and at night they'd go switch clothes and you'd be fighting them. Up where we were, we fought with the North Vietnamese regulars. They had uniforms. And the nice thing, if you want to call it that, about being up there is there was no question who you were fighting. If it wasn't somebody in your group, they're fair game. If there was any noise or any movement at all, you're free to shoot, which made it really quite easy because we all stayed in a close knit group, and anything that happened we run into, there was no question. You could just shoot and assault, and we didn't have to worry about if there were any innocent people out there, because they weren't in the jungle. It was just us and the enemy. We would stay out into the bush for between 3 and 5 days, and then we would get a resupply. Helicopter would come in and drop off food. They wouldn't drop off water. We had to get our own water from the streams, and that many of those were contaminated, and so we had to use iodine pills. If any of you drink water with iodine pills in it. It is it's like the worst rusty water you can imagine. It did save you from getting dysentery or other problems, but we used to send home and have care packages sent to us by our parents or whoever and send us Kool-Aid. So you put Kool-Aid in your water, which made it a lot more drinkable, which, while I'm thinking about it, there were sometimes families that would send care packages like bright red pajamas to keep them warm in the jungle, and all you wear is camouflage, right? Or blankets. And so as soon as we got that stuff, you just immediately dig a hole and bury it, and say thanks to mom and dad. But so there weren't too many things that we could use other than maybe Tabasco sauce or something to kind of jive up our sea rations. And then we'd stay out into the bush anywhere from maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and our longest mission, I think, was 56 days out. And we would get clothing. They would drop off clothing to us out of the helicopters to change our clothes about every 3 weeks. So you got pretty, you felt like an animal. You got pretty rank, but then everybody else was, so it wasn't a big deal. So that led to, after a while, nobody wore underwear. What's the sense of wearing underwear for 3 weeks? So we just wore the pants and the shirt. And so that was interesting. It was very hot, and it was very cold. During the monsoons, it would get to be, I'm guessing, probably 50 degrees. If you've ever been wet for a length of time, it's cold when you're 50 degrees and soaked. During the monsoons, they would last maybe 2 or 3 weeks of solid rain, and several weeks before and after that, it would move in, maybe rain for 4 or 5 hours and leave. But during that 2 or 3 weeks, you'd be soaked. I mean, just soaked day and night. I remember going to bed at night in our hooches, which were ponchos that were snapped together, and try to keep dry, waking up in the morning, and you'd have one dry spot on your whole body, which would probably be about the size of a quarter, be in your crotch, warmest part of your body. That would be the only, your feet soaked, when you're wet for several days, your feet kind of swell up and your skin gets wrinkled. Well, your whole body got to be that way. It was very, very miserable. Occasionally when it would really downpour, just grab a bar of soap, strip down, take a shower. If you didn't do that, the only times we showered were probably maybe, once every 2 or 3 weeks when we were crossing a stream. You'd set out guards around. Guys, I've got pictures for that. You just strip down, everybody take a bar of soap, and we'd get in the stream. Sometimes it'd be 6, 8 inches deep, sometimes deeper, and take a bath. So, it was really interesting. You missed a lot of the comforts that other people had. Bugs were a problem. Mosquitoes. We took pills so we wouldn't get malaria. Some of the guys purposely stopped taking the pills just to get out of the, go to the hospital, get an R&R. But the mosquitoes are terrible. I remember sitting in one of the trails in the heat. You've got your rucksack on and just your helmet, and you're just so miserable, and all these swarms of bugs and mosquitoes around your face. I remember I felt like I was going to go crazy. I just thought, I want to just jump up and run. And I thought, well, and run where? And, you're in the middle of the jungle. And so it was really, really horrible day in and day out living under those conditions. Some of the things we dealt with is animals. Well, as far as the insects go, the warmer the climate, the more diverse the insects. So you can imagine what kind of insects you're going to have in the jungle. Another interesting thing was the animals that were there. We ran into a bear one time, shot it with a M79 grenade launcher, at which it has to go 25 feet before it switches to where it'll explode. If you shoot it before 25 feet, it's just a dud. So we shot it, I think it was around 15 feet away, and it just bounced off of it. So but it ran off, and that wasn't a problem. There were elephants there. We didn't see any elephants, but I saw tracks. The animals were pretty limited because they were fairly annihilated by the bombings that were going on. There were a lot of bombings, B-52s. If you flew over the countryside, you could just see these craters everywhere, just thousands of them. And I used to think, how many years is this going to take to recover for the vegetation to grow over? I was reading an article that within about 25 or 30 years, that had all grown over, all the craters. They're gone now. Anyway, there was one of the guys in our platoon during the night. He rolled over in his sleep, and there was a tiger there that swatted him and peeled part of his scalp back. He didn't go home. They just stitched him up and left him out there to recover. But his nickname after that was Tiger Man. So, and then there was another instance where you'd be walking along in the jungle and you just hear this crashing through the trees, and I mean it just freaked you out. You didn't know who it was there, and we usually hunkered down and kind of took our positions and protected ourselves, wondering what was up. And then they were orangutans that would come through, just in groups, just tearing through the jungle. At one time, one of the guys got caught in between them, and one of them attacked him, and they fight with their feet or biting, and it grabbed a hold of him and thumped him with their hind quarters and broke a couple of ribs. So, you're dealing with the wildlife, not to mention the everyday fighting and everything else that was going on. Let me talk about one of the things that was probably the biggest problems with us were the ticks and leeches. And I don't know if you've heard or had leeches on you. During the monsoons, they were very prevalent. I remember that a few times we would, toward the evening, we would strip down and check each other's bodies for ticks and leeches. And I remember one time checking, and I had about 15, probably about 5 or 6 ticks that were in my body, and the only way you could get them out without digging them out with a knife is to take some alcohol or mosquito repellent and squirt on them, and sometimes they would come out, or have the medic come over and try to get them out for you. But the most disgusting thing were the leeches. How many here have seen African Queen, the movie, where Humphrey Bogart is in there and he gets out and he has these leeches all over his back and he calls them filthy little devils, and that's what they were. I mean, we would check ourselves and you'd pull the leeches off. What they do is they attach to your body and they can crawl up into your boot. They can go all over your body. They latch on. You don't feel them. They inject a little serum in that deadens your skin, and also it's an anticoagulating stuff that the blood free flows from that. And so they end up getting about this big around, about this long, on your body, and then they drop off. And all of a sudden you're walking along and you notice there's a big blood spot here, or on your back or your leg or whatever. I remember one time taking about 8 or 9 of them off my body. And I sat down and my foot felt funny, so I took my combat boot off and looked at it, and it was just, there were 2 or 3 of them in there, and it was just soaking with blood. I took it out and had to wring my sock out and, of course, put it back on. I didn't have an extra pair of socks, but it was pretty gross. Those were some of the everyday things that we lived with. And, not to mention, when you think about being in a jungle and being in the infantry, you usually just think about combat, the firefights you get in. But, there's a whole other world of living in those conditions. So, and then, of course, homesick on top of that with everything else. And so it was not easy. Jungle rot was very prevalent, especially when it was very, very wet. Whenever you would scrape your skin, and going through the jungle, going through thick jungle, it was difficult to go through without getting a few scrapes and scratches, especially going through the elephant grass. I don't know if you've been around any of that. Elephant grass, wide blades, very long. You brush up against it and it'll cut through your clothing. You hit it right. But it'll slice you up, and of course, when you end up getting any kind of wound and you're wet, it doesn't heal up. And so you'd get, I don't know what the term is, but we called it jungle rot, where it would become infected. And you'd go to the medic and he'd put some antibiotic cream or whatever on it and then tape it up with this white tape. And I think there's one picture I have that shows one of my buddies, and in fact, most of us were pretty taped up. Some of us almost looked like mummies. I mean, your face, your neck, your arms, all taped up with this tape, and it wouldn't heal up until it dried up. The weather dried up. So you'd walk around and you'd have these, this taped up, you know, from all your cuts and wounds all over your body, which it was very irritating. Used to get real homesick. We'd get mail probably every 4 or 5 days when we got resupplied. I didn't look forward to mail. I did, but I didn't. I'd get a letter from my parents, and I would be excited to read it. I would read it. When I got through, I was twice as homesick as before, and almost, you know, wished that I hadn't even gotten it. One nice thing is I didn't have a girlfriend. I wasn't married. So those that had girlfriends and those that were married got Dear John left and right. It was really, really tough emotionally. So you've got that you're dealing with too. That was really hard, especially for some of my friends that were married. It was very depressing dealing with all of those things, along with the emotional problems that they were carrying. I won't talk much about the firefights. I'll just talk about one of them. We used to sometimes go a week or two without anything. You'd just be totally bored. And then there are other times where you'd have firefights 2 or 3 or 4 times a day. There was one that stands out in my mind. We just got CA'd into a place that we had been to 2 months ago, so we didn't think there was much activity. There were 15 of us in our platoon. Normally a platoon has 40 to 50 people. We were down a lot with the numbers. There were 15 of us, and we were probably 20 minutes in climbing up a hill, and surprise, we ran into a regiment, which is equal to a company of U.S. soldiers. They were NVA, freshly resupplied. There were 110 of them. So we all dropped down, and what it amounted to is just a wild firefight. It was chaos on both sides. We were both sides kind of pinned down in the thick brush. There was a big rocky area that a lot of them, the NVA, went to for cover. We had intense fire for probably about 3 or 4 hours. We were pretty exhausted by then, and it continued on throughout until dark. We pretty much ran out of ammunition, so we called on one of our other platoons that ran up several guys that resupplied us with ammunition. We called in airstrikes. We called in all kinds of firepower from some of the artillery that were close by that pounded the area. The fighting went on throughout the night. It was extremely weird, eerie, to see flashlights moving around throughout the jungle as they were moving around. And we continued to exchange fire. That went throughout the night. No one slept much. It went throughout the remainder of the day. Finally finished up after 2 days, which is an extremely long firefight. We were totally exhausted. The word combat fatigue is where you're totally drained. You have so much adrenaline when you're under attack like that, you don't realize the energy that you're expending. Also, during that time, when first few hours, I hunkered down next to a tree and continued to fire. I kept a low profile, and after a few minutes realized I was in an ant bed, large black ants, and I couldn't move. It was a pretty tough situation to be in. You know, I was getting bit all over, and I couldn't move. That lasted for about an hour, and later when I came back to pick up some of my personal gear that I'd left there, about maybe 12, 14 inches above my head, the tree was just pulverized with with rounds. I didn't realize in all the excitement how close all of those rounds were coming to me. It was when I talk about having a halo over our head, my best buddy got shot in the head who was next to me. We drug him out, airlifted him out. He made it okay after surgeries of 3 or 4 months. We had probably 4 or 5 other guys that had shrapnel wounds or other kinds of wounds. So that really wasn't bad compared to the other side. We had 110 guys we recovered on the other side, the NVA. We recovered 97 rucksacks. There were about 40 casualties on their side, and we captured 2 guys. And so, the odds turned out to be in our favor. We were very, very fortunate. There's only, and then we had a burial detail. We had after 2 days, and if you've got a dead body in the jungle, after 2 days, they get pretty bloated, and so they sent us in to do a burial detail, which was pretty tough to do with that many bodies, and all there were rocks around. And we had a couple of new guys that were with us in our unit that they had only been in country for about a week, and I felt bad for them because they were so traumatized. All they could do was sit there and throw up. It was just overwhelming to them. Anyway, we had this burial detail that lasted about a day, trying to get all the bodies covered the best we could. One other experience that I don't mean to be graphic, but it was kind of a daily theme for us, is that we had one KIA killed in action on the other side, the NVA. We usually had a kind of a habit of policy when we had someone we had killed, we would immediately bury him, kind of put the fear into their buddies that were out there because they didn't know what happened to them. We buried this guy, and about 3 days later, we called into intelligence to tell them we had to describe what they were wearing and the circumstances so they could keep track of the enemy, of where they were and what they were wearing, so keeping track of the units. 3 days later, they come back and says, well, that's not enough information that we need to have their clothing. So we had to go back, find the grave, dig the guy up, take his clothing off, and then send it back to intelligence. And, it was a pretty rough thing to do for an 18, 19-year-old kid. And so the experiences were rough. They were rough. It's tough to recover from some of those things, especially when you get back home. You make an adjustment when you go there. When you go home, it is a huge, huge adjustment. A lot of guys struggled with that for months, and some of them for years. We had a reunion 35 years after we had all gotten home. We made contact with each other, and I kept a little kind of a phone book of people's addresses and their phone numbers and their home address. And we, through lots of phone calls, thousands of phone calls, we were able to reconnect with a lot of the guys. 2 of them I had kept in communication with over the years, but we reconnected about probably 20 different guys after 35 years and decided to have a reunion. So we had a reunion at our home, which was the most surreal experience I think I've ever had, or my wife has had. We had 17 guys show up, most of them with their wives, and it was the most strange and glorious reunion. We were close. We were extremely close, probably closer than any other unit I think I have ever heard of. We had 17 guys show up for 3 or 4 days and spent the time just healing. There were 2 of the guys that wouldn't come. Some of them were seeing were receiving therapy and just felt like they couldn't deal with the memories or even talking about it. Two of the guys that were good friends of mine committed suicide, one right after they got home, and the other one I had talked to him before the reunion. He said he didn't know if he could make it, and it was tough. A couple weeks later, he took his life. So, everybody has a tough time dealing with that. I have a lot of empathy for those who had been similar circumstances. It's a tough thing to deal with when you come home. I remember coming home and having somebody saying, so, how many people did you kill? And, that's tough when you're dealing with the moral values that you're trying to deal with, realizing that, there's a purpose for that, being in the service, and having your duty of what you needed to do, your mission, and then coming home and having to adjust to that is extremely difficult. And, time heals, and it takes a lot of time for some people. It takes years and years, and some of them, they don't heal. But anyway, it's a tough experience. I'm grateful for the opportunity of serving my country. I do have a lot of questions. I don't know if they were all answered when I got back. Sometimes I think I was more confused after than I was before. But anyway, it's easier for me to deal with questions than it is just talking. So, sure. I'm sorry I'm using so much of your time. Okay.
Does anybody have a question right now?
What was your family's opinion of the war when you were leaving, and did it change after you got back?
I don't think it changed one way or the other. I think the only thing they cared about was how was home safe. I think that's all they cared about. Yes.
You talked about a lot of time spending in the jungle. Did you spend any time in the city or?
No, I didn't. I didn't see any flush toilets.
Although you did go to Hong Kong.
I did go to Hong Kong, and that was, they give you an R&R, which they pay for your way to go to a city. Bangkok was one option, Hong Kong, Sydney, Australia, Hawaii, and several others. You'd go for a week, and so I spent a lot of time looking in the mirror, flushing toilets, and eating hot meals. Yeah.
One of those? Or?
One per year. I took mine after about, I think it was 11 months being in country.
So how long were you out in the bush at a time?
At a time, usually between 2 or 3 weeks, up to 56 days was our longest mission. And then we'd go back in to a base camp and maybe for 2 days, get resupplied. Still didn't have flush toilets there, but
Right.
yeah.
What, I didn't catch, what time was it, 69, 70?
It was 1970. I went in the service in 1969 and through 1970. Toward the end, when I was getting out, I would notice there weren't quite as many guys coming in. They were cutting back on the troops a little bit. Yes?
You mentioned that people would ask insensitive questions when you came back. Mm-hmm. Were there other experiences you had, or I'm assuming you came back and lived in Utah again? I don't know if the people were more supportive here than maybe in bigger cities. Or...
The biggest thing that was to deal with that I could see is apathy. People didn't seem to care. They were still for or against the war. There were some people that were very insensitive. There were times, not with me, but other my friends that were called baby killers because of the My Lai situation. And I can understand the frustration, but there was just a lot of apathy. People didn't care. And then nowadays, people, in my opinion, from my seat, it's overboard. Pendulum went from not caring at all to it almost seemed like it's uncomfortable to me. But at least it's better to overdo that.
David, I see your hand. Want to go ahead?
Thank you. How did you deal with the trench foot during the monsoon season?
The what?
Specifically. The trench foot, the water, how did you prevent prevent your feet from swelling up, and how do you keep them dry to keep them healthy?
You didn't. Wait for the monsoon to be over. But well, occasionally we'd get a change of clothing, but like I say, that'd be every 2 or 3 weeks. So there wasn't a lot you could do. You just live with it.
And I see Daniel. Is that what I'm saying?
Yeah, Daniel Vernal. Did you feel confident in the equipment you were issued?
Absolutely. Yeah, the M16 was it tends to jam, so we had to clean them every morning, take them apart and clean them. I don't think that they were as durable as the AK-47, but yeah, I felt comfortable. I think the M16 is probably the best weapon there is for spraying bushes and throwing out firepower. And all the other things that we had, the M60 machine gun and the M49, M79 grenade launcher, all the stuff we had, I felt very comfortable with.
Did you ever pick up an AK-47 and try it out?
Sure, we used to capture
You didn't
those.
like them as well?
I mean, they were great. I wasn't familiar with them. I was familiar with the M16. Yes?
You guys would go back to base camp. Did you ever have access to any sort of like radio or TV media that was like talking about?
No,
opinion
but just a
of-
little, if you have a little transistor radio,
That was all.
you know, we carried those out in the bush. We weren't supposed to listen to that. One thing I failed to mention is the booby traps we had to deal with too. I don't know if any of you have heard about the punji pits, where they'd have a pit and they would cover it and they would have razor sharp bamboo sharpened sticking up so that if you step, you'd go down and you usually don't land on your feet, which was really horrible. The boots that they issued had steel plates on the bottom, which helped a little bit. Sometimes they had bamboo sharpened in the thick brush off to the side. They would be on this side. When you'd walk down a trail, they'd open fire, and of course, you'd go over here into the stakes. So, and there were a lot of booby traps that we set and they set. So, you know, that was a pretty tough thing to deal with too, daily.
You talked about working with or running into another company. Did you ever work with the ARVN forces or any other companies?
Yes, we did. We didn't work so much with the ARVNs. I knew that they were in the area. We usually just worked separately, and we would keep in contact with other units, that were U.S. units, so we knew where each other were, and we usually kept a distance so we didn't have any friendly fire type problem. I didn't run into that many ARVNs. We did have a Kit Carson Scout, 2 of them that were assigned to us. Those were Viet Cong that were captured. They were reschooled by the U.S. to work for us, and they would travel with us. I was a little leery of them sometimes, but they were helpful sometimes in working with us. I worked with them. I did hear a lot about the ARVNs. Half the time they would drop their weapons and run. They didn't have the commitment that the NVA did, the Viet Cong. So, you know, why invest in people that didn't have their heart in it? So they, you know, I felt bad for them, but they just didn't have the heart. They really didn't have the heart.
A lot of like negative things that came out of the war and just the troubles when you came back home. Were there any positive like lessons that you took from being out there?
I don't know. Experience is wonderful, isn't it? Even bad experiences, and usually the worse experiences, the more you learn from. I can't think of a lot of positive things other than just. Let me just say one thing that's kind of a personal thing. If you want to hold that up, that first one, in that firefight I was talking about, we used to strip some of the personal things off them and send them back to intelligence. One of the things I kept was this watch. And the reason I kept it is it was an old watch, and it's made in, I think, England or possibly France. I'm not sure. It's in English. One of the guys was wearing that, and I know he didn't buy it over there. He got it from probably one of the French that were there beforehand, which was kind of a unique thing to me. So I kept that. But I also, going through there, I found a letter with a picture in it, and I pulled it out and I asked our Kit Carson scout to read it. He was Vietnamese, and he read it. It was a letter from home, from his family. And, that just really struck me, because I sat and thought, that could be me. That could be me. And reflecting on that years later, I realized that I didn't at the time is, those people have families. They're just like me. That age, I hadn't stopped to think about that. So that's another adjustment coming back, realizing, the horrible things of war. I took a literature class at Weber State when I was going the GI Bill, and I remember reading a poem written by, I think, a guy from France, Frenchman, about war. It may have been from World War I, II, I don't know. He talks about, it was the name of it was something like the dying for your country is glorious, but it was in French. Maybe some of you have read this. One of the first two lines in the poem is, if he and I had met by some old ancient inn, perhaps we would have sat down and shared a nipperkin, which is a friendship drink. It made me realize, under these conditions where the enemy, under certain different situations, they could have been our best friend. It made me reflect on that, that people are people no matter where you go. And his situation, the people we were fighting, their situation were much like mine. They might have not wanted to be there, but they were supposedly defending their government and their beliefs. And, that's an interesting thing to think about. Sure. Yeah. I just won't say too much about them. Can you guys see that? Maybe I can just buzz over here a little bit. Okay. Okay, that's, not much to say about just getting off
And these are your
a helicopter. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's just the countryside up in the Central Highlands. Beautiful little rainbow there. Absolutely gorgeous, especially when you're flying over in a helicopter. And that's a fire base. That's where they put the artillery on there that were support for us. We'd pull security on top of the fire base occasionally.
Did you scour the ridge? Is that why it's all dirt?
Yeah, we'd have to level the whole top. I should have taken a picture.
Or should we dim the lights? You can see it already?
Yeah, we'd have to level that whole area. And this young man, I won't mention any names, he's standing there. The sign there says no smoking within 50 feet.
It says ammo.
Yeah, I just thought that was it. You can see the guy up to the right, sitting on the throne. That was as good as it gets as far as the bathroom when you're out there. Yeah, well, at least you know if it's occupied or not, right? And they're just some of the guys. The guy on the left there that's an M79 grenade launcher. It's like a sawed-off shotgun. Those are big rounds. That's just me and a couple of my buddies. That's Dang Thong Lam. He was our Kit Carson scout. He was the one that was captured BC that worked for us. Very nice guy. 37. No, he was a nice guy. 37 years old, had 3 kids at home, and more than likely, when North Vietnam took over, they were the first ones to be killed, annihilated.
Did you ever suspect that they were working both sides? Or?
No, I trusted them. That they couldn't have. There's no way that they could communicate. Yeah, we would have.
And to work to switch sides.
He was captured. He was captured, and then they indoctrinated him. The U.S. did, and I guess the intelligence knew ones that worked and ones that didn't. And then they would assign them out to us. And they were helpful because they helped to recognize booby traps, because they had set them before, when they were fighting the other side. Somewhat too. If we captured some, then we'd have a translator there, right? This is digging a foxhole on a fire base. And this is taking a bath. This is, you're taking a bath, and of course somebody being funny with a fig leaf there. And occasionally we get packages from home, and this guy got a can of bacon, which was a nice relief, unless you could shoot a pig out there. And we set out booby traps at night and claymore mines, if any of you know what those are. A lot of times we'd have animals that would set it off, and this is a civet, which is like a cat. We used to find a lot of those that would trip our mines. Yes, they are. And this is just a picture of me kind of down and out, sitting on our trail. That's how narrow the trails are, blazing through. And this is a picture. It doesn't do justice of the guy jumping off and running there. Those backpacks, you can see the guys in the back have a tough time climbing out. With, you got, like say, you got 80 to 100-pound backpacks trying to climb out of a helicopter and run at the same time when you're under fire. And that's me. I wore a peace sign a lot. So. No.
Was it this one? Is that what you got?
Yeah. Uh-huh. I had a peace sign and a war sign, kind of fit in the controversy at the time. So. This is an earthworm. I thought was kind of interesting. They had just the most interesting insects there. And this is just a picture of, this is a professional picture, actually, that I got from one of my buddies. It's not mine. And this is Patuska. I don't know why they sent him to us. I don't think he weighed 100 pounds. We helped him carry a lot of his ammunition and stuff because obviously he wouldn't have survived.
Who was he?
Just a guy from back east, and I don't know, he should have been a clerk. I don't know why they sent him out to the... I mean, we looked at him when he came in and thought, dude, you're not going to make it. But he did. Sleeping in a hammock.
So is this typical borders?
You weren't supposed to sleep in hammocks because when firefights go on, you want to get as low to the ground as possible. But every night... Yeah, it was, but it was just, yeah. It's nice to sit in a hammock. And this is just hanging out at where we would sit down for the night.
And is this ammunition?
Most of that is, yeah. Carried a lot of ammunition, which weighed a lot. You can see the guy there on the right. He's covered. The guy on the left is a medic. And look at the medic's bag. I mean, it probably weighed more than the rest of ours. And the guy's wrapped up, almost looks like a mummy. I mean, he's yeah. So that's during most of the monsoon time. And this is the guy going home. When they go home, they get on, and the pilot would take him over, cruise over the trees to where your feet would hit the tops of the trees, and give him a wild ride, your last ride before he went home. So that was pretty thrilling. You can see the door gunner there with it. Not to my... However, when we'd pull up and go to jump off like 2 or 3 feet above with your rucksack, some of the guys hesitated. You don't want 100 pounds on your back when you're jumping off. The door gunners, when we're getting fire, they didn't have time to sit there or sit and duck. They'd take their foot and help you out. So, and it's survival. And when we were in Cambodia for a couple of weeks, it was interesting to hear on the news that when Nixon said there are no troops in Cambodia, and we'd just come back from there. So I found this vase, which it was awesome. It's full of old rice, and found out later from Clayton that when he did some research for me that they used it for rice wine. And I humped that thing. I carried it with me, physically carried it as I was hiking and through the jungle for about 3 weeks. Helicopter rides, about 4 or 5 helicopter rides, because I wanted to keep that. And I took it back to base camp, checked it in, and they sent it home, and so I've got it home. It's one of my prized.
It's very thick. So
yeah, it's beautiful. It's really beautiful. Yeah. So, I wanted something. And then the knife I have there and the belt was one of the things that I captured off of one of the NVA. And this was our reunion. Those are the 17 guys that we got together. I have never heard of another unit with that many people. This is our platoon. Usually you have anywhere from 15 to 25, 30 people at a time in a platoon over there. These are the guys that I was close with. And we all showed up, or they showed up at our place for 4 days. And I mean, what an experience. There was more healing that went on than anything any psychiatrist could have helped anybody with. It was wonderful. Oh, we had some shirts made up, and
well, they were the tags.
The dog tags.
So they were it was just dog tags. Yeah, if you look closely, you can kind of see them. So, and then it just had the date of the reunion.
Yeah. So it was.
I found it on the computer. Probably copywritten.
But that, the thing that was interesting is that there were every walk of life you can imagine, different personalities, religions, cultures. There, you'll notice that there were some Hispanics. There were no black guys. We did make friends with blacks, but toward the end, because of the drugs that were so prevalent there, there was a lot of problems with the blacks and the whites, and most of them, well, in my opinion, was their side. A lot of the blacks, for some reason, got on cocaine and heroin, and created a real problem when they wouldn't go on guard duty. They refused to do a lot of things, and so we didn't have that many close associations with them. Although I had some very good guys that were blacks that were very good friends.
Drug culture in the bush.
I wish I would have brought my picture, but I got rid of it. Clayton's mad at me. At one time, I had all the guys just dump all their stuff that was in their pockets at the time in base camp. We filled a bunk, and there was cocaine, heroin. Heroin here is about 10%. Over there, it was 90% pure heroin. Bags of Bong Song bombers. Well, they were joints that were probably about this big around, about that long. And, there was probably, in today's market, it would probably be about $500,000, and they were off our platoon. And that people just carried around, bags of stash about like that. It'd be your personal use. We didn't do it out in the field, out in the bush, because it was absolutely crucial that we cover for each other. It was when we were resupplied or on a fire base where we were more protected, and then there was a lot of that went on. But yeah, a lot of drugs, lots and lots of drugs. Cheap drugs. Buy a pack of cigarettes for 17 cents at PX, and they gave them to you free in your C rations, and you could trade them straight across for packaged marijuana that were dipped in opium. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it was so prevalent. It was really. It surprised me there weren't very many people that came home that were addicted. There were a few, but I think most people knew how to control it. And it wasn't a recreational type thing. I guess you could say that, but when you're dealing with all those pressures and those difficulties, it was an escape for most people. I think there were 26 people in our group at one time, and I think there was one person who didn't take drugs, and he was a juicer. He drank. So, yeah.
We didn't do drugs, but we just played video games for 2 or 3 days straight.
And you got to do something. You got to. I mean,
2 or 3 days straight.
Yeah, we played spades, which was probably one way of, and you survive. Sometimes you do everything you can to survive.
How was the higher command's opinion on having drugs in the platoons and stuff?
They didn't like it. They didn't dare search people because everybody had it. They would try to ignore it. But I think people were really good about using common sense. When you're out and your life depends on it, you're not going to be, doing that. But yeah, there's not a lot they could do. There's nothing they could do, actually. What are they going to do if they catch you? Send you to Vietnam? So, that was what we said.
Tell them about your commanding officer.
Our commanding officer was a Hispanic. He was the neatest guy I think I ever met. He was a captain. He was 23 years old. He referred to us as his sons. Interesting, the age limit. You probably saw some young guys there. We had a great relationship. He used to say that he would worry at night when he heard fire going back and forth. You could hear the difference between the M16 and the AK-47. You could tell the difference. And he says, whenever I heard the M16s going off more than the AK-47s, I'd go, go guys, go guys. He was like a mother hen over us, and a very kind person. I had the highest respect for him. When he would travel with us, this is a captain, he would walk point. He would never ask us to do anything that he was not willing to do all the time. Put his life on the line with anybody else. Boy, how can you not have respect for people like that? Truly a great man. Huh? He didn't come to this reunion. We had one 5 years later, and he came to that, which was really unusual. This is just a platoon. This is just our small group. He's a company commander, and we had a close contact with him, and he came out. Wonderful, wonderful man.
When we had our reunion.
Yeah, and that's one reason why he didn't come. But he was incredibly wonderful guy. He did about 3 tours over there, and he ended up being a fighter pilot after being in the infantry, which was really interesting. And he said that our group he got closer to our group than any other group that he ever served with the whole time he was in the service.
This is David Tooele. Have you ever heard of or read anything written by Colonel Hackworth? And what is your opinion of him?
I haven't read a lot of material. There's some books that I've read that I didn't care much for, but I haven't done a lot of reading. But no, I'm not familiar with that.
Nathan?
Thank you.
Any further question?
Did you ever feel like you were making any progress towards stopping communism while you were there, or do you think you guys were just spinning your wheels?
Spinning your wheels is probably, so many times we'd take a hill or take a piece of ground, and then when you withdraw 2 weeks later, they were back there. And you think, why? Yeah, I don't know. From my perspective, I've heard of people saying, well, if we just would have stayed there longer, if we just would have done this or done that, it was an unwinnable war. There's just no way. We had the firepower. We had the technology. We lost 55,000 troops. They lost 1 million troops. They lost 4 million civilians. They won. So that's kind of hard to take. Makes me think we need to think before we get into, this is so repetitious, Those who forget the past are condemned to repeat it. So.
You didn't like a lot of the books that you read. What do you think about the media portrayal and the films and all that stuff that
the films are Hollywood.
Yeah.
They got John Wayne in there running around. We had one John Wayne type guy in our unit, and that battle I was telling you about, he got shot. He was the dead. It's very unrealistic. The media, I think, depends on that the series that they did. That might have been it. I can't remember. I can't think of the one. I watched part of one of those that was like a documentary. Of course, that was great as far as being accurate.
It might be the one that Pat Ben watched for his class. It's a few decades old. It came out maybe in the 80s or 90s. Yeah. Television history.
Yeah, I
mean,
those.
It's a long series, like 8 or 10.
I think that's the one I saw part of, and of course that's accurate. That's great. The movies, Hollywood.
I'm sorry to talk so much. I have a couple questions. So I understand you guys are planning a trip to go back to Vietnam? And after you having described your experience there, why do you want to go back? And the second question is, you said you didn't have a direction after you graduated, so you joined the Army. Did you have a direction when you came back from the war?
Yeah, one thing that helped, I wanted a family, I wanted to settle down. That's what I wanted. I actually cleaned up my act when I got home. I hadn't turned 21 yet, I was still 20, which was kind of ironic, but I turned 21 and I wasn't drinking and smoking anymore. It was kind of bizarre. But, you grow up fast sometimes. As far as going back there, I've always wanted to go back as a tourist, because all I saw was the Central Highlands and the jungle. I didn't see anything else. And so, and plus I have a little in. My niece married a Vietnamese guy that's partial French. He's a branch president in Ho Chi Minh City for the LDS Church, and he has a lot of connections with the government. So we're excited to go back there and have somebody that knows the language, knows the culture, and enjoy, and be a tourist.
Did you or anyone on your platoon have any particular feelings towards the anti-war and hippie movement at home, or were you just not really concerned about that while you were over there?
You mean, were they like hippies? Peace?
No, were you angry at them? Did you sympathize with them?
No, I guess I could relate to both. Mike Royko, I don't know if any of you know him. He's a syndicated columnist. Years ago, he passed away probably about 15, 20 years ago, so you probably wouldn't remember him. I loved him. He would say a lot of accurate things in his columns. He once mentioned about most of the peace people, the hippies and stuff, were just chicken. They were afraid of going in and fighting, and so that was their way of protesting, so they wouldn't go in or or be drafted. I kind of feel a lot that way. I think there were a lot of serious people that wanted peace, and it was justified. But I think during the times it was easy to jump on the bandwagon and say, no war. I don't want to go there, and it was very convenient.
Did you follow communism after the fall of Saigon and just kind of in China and the Soviet Union, just kind of through the 70s and 80s and track it? Were you interested in that, or did you just not care?
I didn't pay a lot of attention to it, I guess. But I mean, it's interesting when I found out that that Vietnam was being overrun, and the Khmer Rouge and their part. There are a lot of great books out on that. It's pretty amazing to read what happened. I mean, there's just so much devastation. But I didn't keep that current. But a lot of it, I just wanted to live life. I just wanted to, be a part of society. I did say that I really appreciate the GI Bill, because I wouldn't have gone to school, sadly enough. And I'm just so grateful for the GI Bill, because I got my degree, and there's nothing better to broaden your perspective on life than education. I don't care what degree you get. I don't care. Yeah, I mean, I think it is an absolute must. It just broadens your whole perspective on life.
We're going to run out of time before long, but I want to make sure that we get to everybody who wants to ask a question. So is there anybody who hasn't yet? Make sure we get those first.
Nicole hasn't.
Nicole.
I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you for your service. My dad is friends with a lot of Vietnam veterans, and he once told me the best thing that I can say to you is welcome home. So welcome home. And I do actually have a couple questions, too. I'm curious why you decided to choose the Army where you volunteered. And also, you mentioned having a Native American in your outfit. I was wondering if, I know during World War II they did a lot of the wind talkers, the Navajo code. I'm wondering if they did anything like that, or if it was just by chance that he was in your outfit.
Just by chance. I mean, we're all thrown in together. No matter what your nationality was, we all just were on even keel and did the same thing. The first part of your question, why did I go in the Army? We went around and checked out all the others. Well, Air Force and Navy is 4 years. If you're going to jump in for an experience, I wanted to go and do the fighting I wanted to be in the infantry, and the best way to do that is to join the Army, which was 2 years. The only problem is when you join for 2 years, you do whatever they tell you. You don't have a choice. I didn't pick what I wanted. I just suggested I wanted to be in the infantry, which, how many people volunteer for that? So that was very, very easy. And the nice thing about that is by extending my tour 2 extra months over there is I got a 6-month early out, so a year and a half. It was pretty cool.
This is kind of a weird question that occurred to me when you were speaking, but you mentioned how the forests and the craters, it was all gone after 20, 30 years. But you also mentioned how a lot of the animal populations were decimated by the bombing and the booby traps.
That did not come back.
That did not come back.
They do have, I've been reading a book a little bit about traveling over there, and they have preserves over there, but they're very limited. The number of tigers and elephants are very, very limited, and they're very protected. I think most of the wildlife, I think, was not eradicated, but just made a huge dent in it. Still, the Agent Orange did wipe out a lot of the foliage, a lot of the jungle, but that seemed to come back. I didn't seem to have a long-lasting effect other than on the troops. There are still a lot of people that are getting all kinds of cancer and other kinds of things from the Agent Orange.
Other questions? We can take maybe 1 or 2 more. Other questions?
This is David Twill again.
Okay, go ahead, Dave.
If it makes you feel any better, when I got home from Iraq and my plane landed in Salt Lake, the first question that hit me was the first question that hit you, so times haven't changed much. Yeah. Sorry.
Anybody else? Yeah.
I'm curious, you kind of mentioned how now you look and say, think before we go and different things like that. Do you have any, and you also mentioned about the importance of education, do you feel like if there's maybe one theme or one idea that you feel that people maybe completely misunderstand about the Vietnam War, or that we should learn and not repeat, or I don't know, I guess what's a big...
That's probably the thing that has gone through my mind. And, when I got out, I don't know, I felt like I was probably just as confused as before. There didn't seem to be a clear-cut answer. However, in thinking about all of this and the war in Iraq and all the other wars, why is it that the Americans get drawn every 20 years we get into something? This has been going on for years and years and years. And you can justify, no matter what's going on politically, you can justify going into war. And I think we get so confused with what's going on that you can make a rationale excuse to do it. And I just think, why do we keep doing this? My feeling is the only time that was really justified was during World War II, when we were being attacked and it directly affected us. I think we worry too much about being Big Brother. I think it's good to help other countries. But I think when we feel like we have to step in and stop it, if you think it's a domino effect or anything else, I just think that we're not thinking clearly. I think the best thing for us to do is to get our act together as a country and be solid and be a good example to all the other countries so that they will want to have what we have instead of trying to force. We went into South Vietnam to help them out. The leaders were corrupt, for one thing. The people that I talked to really didn't care. They didn't care who was there. They just wanted to be left alone and live their life. And I think sometimes we think we're doing good, and it's like protecting our kids. We don't give them learning experiences. We're always there to help them out. And I think too much we go in and we try to help people way too much. And we try to force democracy on them when I think the best thing we can do is sit back and just be a good example and be there when they're asking for help and they really want it instead of pushing it on them. Well, that was a great question, and that's probably been the theme that has gone through my mind more than anything.
I think it's a good one to end on, too. I have to teach another course in Lucas, so we're going to go ahead and end. But we had a really good discussion. Appreciate all of your questions. And join me in thanking my guests.